Hello. So we're going to start out with a short video for Music 104, just talking about seventh chords in general. I've got a piano set up just under here, so you'll hear me play, but you won't see me play. And I've got the board over here, and I hope you'll be able to see my notation as clearly as possible. So just as a reminder, we've been working with seventh chords quite a lot already, but they were always built on the fifth scale degree. And therefore, what we've been dealing with are things called dominant sevenths. So those were always right here, whether I was in a major key or in a minor key. There were certain sound qualities associated with that type of seventh chord. In particular, if I wanted to break it down, remember that any triad that I work with draws its name from one of the component intervals. So if I had something like a so-called major triad, the name of that sonority comes from the relationship between the root and the third in either case. Therefore, there are actually three intervals that are engaged in a triad. I've got 2/3 and a fifth, a major third and a minor third and a perfect fifth, as you remember, but we call the whole triad unit in terms of just this one particular interval. Now, when we go to seventh chords, what we're going to do is add one more interval quality. So I'm going to use just one of them to describe the triad. And remember, I've got four basic triad types: major, minor, augmented, and diminished. So far, we've only had a little bit of exposure to diminished triads. We haven't had any exposure at all to augmented triads. Today, we will. But we're also now going to consider adding a seventh. And so, because you can have a wide variety of seventh chords, what you want to be able to do is come up with a naming system for all of the types that will appear. So, for example, I can say this is a dominant seventh because it's built on the seventh scale degree. But what I really mean by that is I get a seventh chord that consists of a major triad and a minor seventh on top. Therefore, another name for the dominant seventh is what we call the major minor seventh chord. And we would write it in this way. So the first letter refers to the quality of the triad. The second letter refers to the quality of the seventh. So this is true whether I'm in a major key or in a minor key. I haven't actually put a key signature over here because I wanted you to be able to see what each of the accidentals would be as we built up sevenths on each scale degree. So in fact, if I were in the key of C minor here, I would of course have that natural sign in place. Now, one thing that I can do, which is a familiar practice for us from before, is just build up triads by stacking thirds. So originally what we did when we were learning about triads was doing exactly that. And we quickly discovered that there were some basic patterns in place. For example, if I took triads and built them on scale degrees 1, 4, and 5, in a major key, those are always major in quality. Correspondingly, if I built triads on scale degrees 2, 3, and 6, those were minor in quality. And of course, to that, I could add the diminished triad on scale degree 7. So, if I then wanted to add sevenths to each of these triads, I would first of all make note of the fact that I have these basic triad qualities in place. And then on top of that, I would be adding sevenths and qualifying those. So if I do that, what I get is a series of seventh chords that will sound like this. Which it's a little difficult to get the sense of if I just play them in a stream like that. However, if I start to do things like we used to do with the triads themselves, remember I'd play a triad on scale degree 1, on 4, and on 5, and I could hear those triads one after the other, each having the same basic sound quality. Likewise, 2, 3, and 6. So what happens if I actually add the 7th on top? I'm going to start out by working with triads on scale degrees 1, 4, and 5. This is what they sound like. And right away my ear picks up on something important. If I have a 1/7 chord or a 4/7 chord, they sound very similar to each other. The 5/7 chord, although it also has a major triad underneath, is sounding a little bit different. And that is because of this minor 7th that's produced when I stack that third right on top. When I've stacked up by a further third here or here, what I'm actually arriving at is a major 7th. Therefore, creating myself a little bit more space here. The 7th built on scale degree 1 and on scale degree 4 are major 7ths, and they will sound different from the one built on scale degree 5, our friend the dominant 7th, which is a major minor 7th. So that's one way in which this naming system can capture that distinction between these sound qualities. I want to try the same kind of experiment with 7ths built on scale degrees 2, 3, and 6. Here's 2. Here's 3, and here's 6. And actually, those ones do sound similar. And that's because, again, the 7th that I've added here turns out to be a minor 7th. In that case, from E to D is also a minor 7th. And from A to G is also a minor 7th. So that's why in this case, when I add 7ths to minor triads on those particular scale degrees, 2, 3, and 6, they actually do sound the same. The 7th quality itself is the same. So right away, you know how much I like to simplify the notation that I work with. One thing that I can do is say, well, you know what? Whenever I'm doubling up on the same type of quality, major triad and major 7th. And remember, the first letter is always referring to that singular interval between the root and the third of the triad. But we're letting it stand for the triad as a whole. But if it's the same, major 7th, major 7th, and that's different from a major minor 7th, well, why don't I just call these things major 7ths? So that's one way in which I can simplify the naming system. So built on scale degrees 1 and 4, that is to say a tonic 7th chord in major and a subdominant 7th chord in major, what gets produced is a major 7th chord. If it's a dominant 7th, that's quite distinctive. That's that major minor 7th, and that's one reason why people often just refer to the major minor 7th as the dominant 7th, because it sticks out. It's special to that particular scale degree. Likewise, if I'm dealing with supertonic 7th or a mediant 7th or a submediant 7th, the two chord qualities indications for the minor triad and the minor 7th are the same. Why don't I just call those minor 7th? And so again, if I listen to all of these things, but not just one right after the other, I'm going to cluster them into their particular sound categories. So the minor 7ths, supertonic 7th, mediant 7th, submediant 7th, all have a common sound quality. If I go to the tonic 7th and the subdominant 7th, Those likewise have the same basic sound quality. The one that sticks out so far is the dominant seventh, major minor seventh. The only thing we haven't talked about yet is the seventh that's built on scale degree 7. You could call it the leading tone seventh. But here's the thing. If I have just a triad, of course the triad itself is diminished in quality. But, I'm talking not about just the third, but the chord as a whole. If I'm adding a seventh onto that, that is minor in quality. So if I'm using this terminology, this is a diminished minor seventh chord, but I can't write it like this. It means that only one part of this thing is diminished. We call that a half diminished seventh chord, and to show that, I draw a line just through there, okay? So now, in terms of the naming system, I've got 2 major sevenths, 3 minor sevenths, just 1 major minor seventh or dominant seventh, and 1 diminished minor seventh, also known as a half diminished seventh. Now, if I take that naming system and try to apply it to the context of minor, just as a reminder of what we are working with, I'm going to apply the harmonic minor scale. Just to keep things simple, yes, you can have seventh chords in minor that come purely from the diatonic collection, but what I'm going to be focusing on right now is the most common use of seventh chords, which tends to assume harmonic minor in most circumstances. So that means that on scale degree 3 here, I already have a leading tone that I need to raise. If I'm looking at scale degree 4, I need that. Back over here to scale degree 6, scale degree 7, back to 1. I have an interesting pattern, right? Minor triad, got a diminished triad. For the first time in this course, we're actually going to have an augmented triad. And so you show that by writing the Roman numeral uppercase and put a little plus sign after that. It's a bit odd for us because often we think of the plus sign as being associated with a major key, a major mode. When you're applying it to a Roman numeral like this, it means an augmented triad. Then we have minor subdominant. We're going to assume dominant seventh with the raised leading tone. Submediant harmony is going to be major, and once again, as before, we will have a leading tone seventh that's diminished in quality until we add a seventh to it. We're back to scale degree 1. So likewise, I can write the same sort of information here, starting out with the basic indications. M for minor triad, D for diminished, A for augmented, lowercase m for minor. Once again, we have our major minor seventh, dominant seventh, M for major. And once again, remember we're having it twice in this context, diminished triad, and back to minor. Okay, so now I'm going to add the sevenths, and what I'm going to do is apply the kinds of accidentals that I would use for harmonic minor. So, I'm going to keep track of my B naturals. And I'm adding in all the accidentals so that we pop this up here. By the way, sorry for packing things in like this, but I need to have the camera set up so that you can see what's going on. So I'm going to try to write in a closed space like this. And, well, we know what that's going to be. Same thing as before. Okay, so if I play that particular sequence, actually some very different seventh qualities, which are actually very cool. What are they? Again, this kind of naming system will help us to pick up on the particular characteristics that give them those distinctive sound qualities. So I have a curiosity here. I've got a minor triad with a major seventh on top. So note how this is different from the dominant seventh. There it's a major minor seventh. If we reverse that and have a minor major seventh, we get this sound. So this is the major minor seventh on the same scale degree. I'm just using C as the root. Major, triad, minor seventh. Well, if I flip it around and have a minor triad, major seventh, very cool sound quality. If I go to my supertonic seventh in this case, you might remember this sound quality from before, where we have a diminished triad, but a minor seventh. Therefore, this is a half diminished seventh. Very distinctive sound quality for the 2/7 chord in a minor key. The median seventh, it's one of my favorite seventh chords. In that case, what we have is the augmented triad with a major seventh on top of that. It's a very bright, bold sound quality. Very distinctive. I really like that. The seventh on scale degree 4, you might remember that before when we were looking in the context of the major key, the tonic seventh and the subdominant seventh had the same quality because they had the same major triad underneath and then they had the major seventh added to that. So chords 1/7 and 4/7 sounded fundamentally the same. The big difference in the context of a minor key is that in this case, because of the leading tone, the tonic seventh was this very striking sound quality, a minor triad with a major seventh on top. The 4/7 chord, however, is quite a bit calmer, shall we say. We have a minor seventh on top of a minor triad. So that's that minor seventh idea, which, as we've heard before, is simply described as a minor seventh. So we don't need to double up on that anymore. We've already covered the major minor seventh for the dominant seventh. For the 6/7 chord, submedian seventh, we have a major triad and we have a major seventh on top of that. So it's the same quality that we had before for tonic seventh and subdominant seventh in a major key. We're getting simply a major seventh here. All right? Now, the new thing that we have to learn is, wait a second, the last time I was on scale degree 7, which had a diminished triad, I added a seventh and it happened to be a minor seventh. Therefore, it was not something that stayed the same sound quality throughout. So we ended up characterizing that as a half diminished seventh, just like we did the supertonic seventh in minor. Here, I don't do that because, so this is me putting an X through that, I have both a diminished triad and a diminished seventh, right? So just as a reminder, a major seventh would be something like B to A sharp, okay? The minor seventh would be B to A natural. Therefore, from B to A flat is a diminished seventh. So this would be a double D seventh chord, diminished seventh. And rather than saying diminished, we just say it's a diminished seventh. We write that. And now we actually know why these funny things here are called half diminished sevenths. Just because you only have to say diminished once. Diminished minor seventh, it's a half diminished seventh. If it's a diminished seventh, oh, that's a silly thing to say. Let's just call it a diminished seventh. And we're done. So these are the basic types of seventh chords that we'll be working with. We've already worked quite a lot with the major minor sevenths here. What we're going to be specifically interested in next is working with the 2/7 chords, because remember, what we were interested in coming up with was an alternative harmony for subdominant function. And we discovered that we could use chord 2 to do that. Well, likewise, we can actually use chord 2/7. We might remember from our discussion before that chord 2 in a minor key was a little tricky to work with because it's a diminished triad, and so we decided for the most part that ordinarily we're going to double the third and use it in first inversion, so it's almost behaving like a true subdominant chord. Note once again that if we're dealing with a supertonic seventh in the context of the major key, it is a minor seventh. It's going to have a very different sound quality in the minor. And this is why, if you consider some of the examples that you get at the very start of the chapter on the supertonic seventh, you'll hear a lot of supertonic sevenths in a minor key. So we had this Beethoven passage, and I think it's probably page 233. So what you're hearing there is 1/6. This is that to half diminished 6/5. It's in an inversion. Cadential 6/4/5. This is from a Beethoven Appassionata Piano Sonata, Opus 54. Okay. Also, you've got on the facing page, I think it's page 234, kind of blue. Sorry. It should be. There we go. Now, what's interesting about that one, that's the 2/7 chord. It's in root position. That's an altered seventh chord. I'll talk about chord alterations to sevenths a little bit later on, because those are kind of cool and fun. But what's neat about that is that it then resolves to a tonic seventh in minor key. So that's that minor major seventh sound quality. Okay, so that's a basic introduction for us to seventh chords. The next video will be focusing in on the use of the supertonic seventh in particular. Thank you.